Welcome into Williamsville South High School. This is the pregame show of the New York State Public High School Athletic Association Class D Far West Regionals. Francis Beck, joined by Tim Chief, as we get you ready for this Class D game between CSP out of Section 6 and Canisteo-Greenwood, the Chargers, out of Section 5. And Tim, this is a matchup between two teams who know this game very differently. CSP looking for their third state title in 6 years. Canisteo-Greenwood just won their first sectional title in program history.
Yeah, not only that, Francis, is if you look at on paper, definitely had different seasons too. You can pretty much say that CSP hasn't been battle tested too much at all. They have pretty much dominated every game that they played. I think one game that we saw was relatively close was Franklin-Villelogil 23-17, but every other game pretty much dominated. Now you look at, on the other hand, with Canisteo-Greenwood, they've definitely been battle tested. They have two losses earlier in the season, a 13-12 loss against York Pavilion and then a 25-20 loss against Avon. Now, what's unique about this situation is they've actually avenged both those losses. They play both those teams later on. They beat Avon 20-6, and then they beat York Pavilion 6-0. So a lot of games close. So they've definitely faced some adversity. So I don't know what the advantage is, to be perfectly honest. So, we witnessed a team last weekend with Medina who really didn't have any adversity all year, and the first time they did, they fell to Salamanca. So you can look at it both ways. If you're not battle tested, you might be that dominant. That could be one of the things, or it could come back to bite you. So definitely a unique situation, but on paper, it looks like it should be a really good game.
I think one thing we have to talk about right now, it's been raining all day here in Williamsville, and this CSP team, they love to throw the football with Cantonese. Obviously, they can run the football with Bryce Polsker. He has 703 yards, but they were primarily a passing team, and this rain, which is supposed to last throughout this whole this game here, that's a bit of that takes something out of the CSP offense.
It does, but if you there's little things, Francis, and this might sound ridiculous, but the little things, the ball boy has a huge part of this game. He really does. You need to get a dry football in there. Now, rain, it helps the offense more than the defense because the defense is going backwards and the offense knows where it's going. So you can still throw the football if you can get a dry football on there. And again, the cuts are much harder on the defense than on the offense. And you mentioned Tate Cantonese. What a senior season he's had. 116 for 169. That is just impressive in itself. 1,500 yards, 22 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions. But he's also a dual threat. He's got 519 yards with 10 touchdowns that way also. So he can do it all for CSP. But really, I know that sounds ridiculous, but little things like getting a dry football, this isn't high colleges, or the pros where they just have, 35 footballs, just throw in dry ones. You got to get a football, you got to dry it with a towel, and then get it back to the ref. Hopefully the ref doesn't drop it, So there's little things like that really could be crucial in games like this.
Yeah, and I know for CSP, I believe the ball boy is Coach Harper's son, so I'm sure he'll be talking to him. Yeah,
he's got a big game on his hand. You have to get a dry football in there, and like I said, you only have 4 to 5 footballs to play with. You don't have 30 NFL balls, so you got to get the football, you got to get the towel dry, and then you got to hand it to the ref because you can't throw it to them because they might drop it. It's little things like that really people don't think about. It's crucial when it's this wet out there.
I sometimes, when I played center, I almost felt like if it was a little wet, I kind of got my hands wet and maybe sit on my hands a little bit to get a better grip. Did you do anything as a quarterback during this inclement weather?
Well, you always have, obviously you have the towel, the old school towel, like, by where your belt buckle is. But nowadays, as far as receivers and defensive backs, the gloves that they make now, the technology in the gloves, they are just ridiculous. The stick 'em, it's almost like they have crazy glue on them. It's just crazy. So I don't expect the weather to be, huge deal that way. Now, if the wind picks up, that's a different world. The wind for an offense, a throwing offense, is way more crucial than rain.
You know, we should point out some guys on Canisteo-Greenwood, the Chargers. They're led by quarterback Colin Cox. He's a senior, 7 for 157, 111 yards, 14 touchdowns, about 250 yards on the ground. And then their running back is Ben Z, 158 rushes, 960 yards, 7 touchdowns. And then leading receivers, J.J. Reese, 22 catches, 276 yards.
I think it might be Bozy.
Oh, Bozy, you're right.
Yeah, they're definitely senior heavy as far as their leaders, and it looks like they we don't have we're not going to lie, we don't have a ton on the Section 5. We're just learning. We watch highlights as we go, but we're a Section 6 area, so we know those teams really well. But it looks like they rely on Z quite a bit. The senior running back linebacker, 960 yards, 7 touchdowns. But they pretty well balanced, 157 yards. We talked about how much CSP likes to throw. They threw the ball 169 times. Well, Cox is throwing 157. That's not a huge difference. And especially with close games, that's why. So it actually is tainted a little bit. Cantonese probably his numbers probably would be a lot higher. But when you're dominating so many games, you run the ball, the second half mostly then.
And I know they didn't play their first round in the playoffs. I'm trying to see. I think they played all their other games. So they haven't. I know sometimes teams, if you win by forfeit, you lose those games stats-wise. When you're just looking at purely that number, they didn't lose any of that, but they did get a first-round bye. But he's had an impressive season. You don't really see quarterbacks from Class D put up numbers like he has, and he really has put up great numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you have to remember, Francis, when you're talking about these Class D, even the quarterbacks, a lot of these guys, they play both ways. You don't have 50, 60 players on these teams, okay? So a lot of these players, they play, the quarterbacks, you see them play safety quite a bit, sometimes cornerback. Safety is probably the most obvious for quarterbacks. But you see the running backs, they always play either, linebacker or cornerback, and then the receivers always play cornerback. So when you talk